All right, so we are kind of done with our quantitative graphs in terms of learning different ones. So before we go too much further, I just want to talk about some strengths and weaknesses of each. This is another thing that's popped up in some different multiple choice questions in particular. So when it comes to dot plots, some of the strengths are that you can see individual data points, which is nice. Because if you can see the data points, that means you could use those, put them in your calculator, do other things with them. With dot plots, it's really easy to see shape, and they're really simple to make. Now, if you have huge data sets, they might take time, but they're easy to make. They're simple. The steps themselves, you're just putting numbers on paper on a number above a number line. Weaknesses of a dot plot are that they're not great for really large data sets. As I mentioned, that can take a while, and it can be harder to see shape if you don't really have any repeated values. If you got a bunch of decimals, and so there, you have a 26.54, and then you also have a 26.38. On a dot plot, those would be separate numbers. Plus, now your dot plot's got to have a bunch of decimals to it. So if you don't have a bunch of repeated values, it's a little bit harder to see shape. You can kind of see some things if you know what to look for, but it's definitely a lot trickier and subtler to see. With stem plots, you can see individual data points, like a dot plot. It's easy to see shape again. There's a little bit of trickiness of the stem plot because it's kind of sideways, so you need to be a little bit careful about that, but you can see shape pretty easy, and they're pretty easy to make. You have to do a little bit of thinking about what's going to be in your stem, but they're pretty easy to make. Weaknesses are is you kind of need data bunched fairly close together. If you have numbers that go from like the teens and up to 1,000, that's going to be tough to do a stem plot for because of all the stems you would need. So you need your data fairly close together, and it's hard to do for really large data sets. Kind of like a dot plot. They're just kind of time consuming, and you're going to have a ton of leaves potentially to them. Box plots are easy to make on a calculator, super fast. It's easy to see the quartiles because they are literally marked on there, and there are definitely times where we want to know where those quartiles are. Outliers are graphed separately, so you can identify outliers very clearly. And they work well for comparing, and we'll do that a little bit later. But if you have two sets of data you want to compare, box plots work really nice because you can put two box plots on the exact same graph at the same time and do some really direct comparisons of different values. As far as weaknesses, they're kind of tedious to make by hand. If you didn't have the calculator to do them, or calculate your 5-number summary, you'd be counting all sorts of points, figuring out where the medians and the quartiles were, so they're a little bit tedious that way. We can't see individual data points, so if all you have is a box plot, all you're ever going to have is a box plot, you don't see enough detail to make a different kind of graph from those points. And shape can be tricky. We'll look at some examples where you can kind of tell shape. If one side of the box is bigger than the other, and that same side whisker is bigger than the other side whisker, you might be able to say it's skewed that way, but it can be tricky. You can have some misleading sets there, so we kind of are careful with shape with box plots. And then histograms. Histograms are great for kind of everything else that doesn't work well here. They work fine for huge data sets. Your data could be spread out from the teens all the way to the thousands or even 10,000s. Just make your bars wider. Your bars might go from 0 to 2,000, 2,000 to 4,000, and you can get up into the 10,000s pretty easy. And you can graph values with different digits and different decimals. You could have values that are 26.38, 26.59, 26.782. It doesn't even matter what decimals they have because you're just putting them in a bar, counting how many are in the bar. So they work really well for kind of all the sets of data that these ones don't. Some weaknesses, you can't see individual data points. So you can't find, if you just have a histogram, you can't find the exact median. You can't make any sort of other kind of graph from it. And it's hard to identify the median and the quartiles precisely. You can say which bar they're in. Like if you know you have 13 points, you can go to where the 7th point would be and at least say which bar it's in, but that's kind of the best you can do.